All right. Here we are. The
Hello,
month of
everybody.
May.
Our 18th episode, Bobby.
18. Holy crap. Good
Welcome,
stuff.
everybody. This is our interactive podcast. Uh, for those of you who have joined in the audience, if you have anything to add to the conversation or any questions that you'd like to ask us, feel free to raise your hand. This is part of the podcast. We love to have a discussion or collaboration as much as we can.
Yeah,
Today's
please participate, guys. We love spitballing ideas. We go over a lot of topics in these podcasts, and we not a better place. There's no better place to get good information and what's the latest and greatest from the boots on the ground. The people who are actually in the trenches making recon happen.
Yeah. As much as this is a conversation between you and I, Bobby, we also want to be able to facilitate discussions between all the dealers that are uh, linked up, essentially as part of making the same decision to bring on software like ours. But today's topic is what can leaders do, or process-based leadership, the idea of what do leaders do every day that helps their organization stay on track, that helps promote transparency and accountability with regards to recon in particular. And we're highlighting, just how important leaders are overall to adoption, utilization, and making sure that people conform to their proper processes and meet the standard that we set together as a team.
So, Josh, on that note, when it comes to the recon process, who would you consider a leader?
Well, certainly the department heads. I would say
Yeah.
first and foremost, first and foremost is the recon manager, right? So if there is somebody who's at your dealership who's in charge, what top of that organizational structure is going to be the recon
Love it.
manager in terms of responsibility. If you don't have that person in place, then the degree to which someone is responsible to recon in particular is going to vary, but if there isn't that one ultimate pinnacle, then there's going to be, each department head has their own responsibility to the process.
Yeah,
Each person.
you hit the nail on the head, Josh, and that was kind of what I was getting at. You don't have to have the title of manager in your official name to be a leader in the recon process. And I liked what you said about, the recon manager, the internal advisor, or, the person who's, really, tasked with putting these cars through the recon process. I think you can agree every time we want to know everything and all things and get the most information about what's going on about recon in a store, we want to talk to that internal advisor, right?
100%. Yeah. So yeah, leaders doesn't necessarily just mean managers in the strictest
Mhm.
sense. Leaders can be those people who are driving the process forward every day. But uh, as far as this topic goes, I want to highlight all of the leaders possible. So
Mhm.
obviously that recon manager is the go-to, the one-stop shop pretty much for all things reconditioning, if that role exists at your store. But what does the used car manager do? I'd say that's probably the second most important person. If you have a recon manager, then the second most important person in terms of making sure that, uh, uh, or I should say, in terms of just overall process and having that authority of a leader standing behind your standards and your processes, the used car manager is the next most important person down the line.
Mhm.
And we can highlight what they would do every day. But if we're still talking kind of like in order of priority, I'd probably put the service manager right underneath that. And of course,
Sure.
the GM remains sort of, at the height, adjacent to the entire process. But with regards to active day-to-day things happening, recon
Mhm.
manager, used car manager, service manager, and then, it's not necessarily a hierarchy per se, but your inventory manager is also going to fall somewhere in that line as well. If you have like a lead lot porter or someone who's moving the cars every day, who has insight into the actual on the ground movement of every car, that's another leader. That's another person who needs to be, if you have a tool, they need to be on it, and who contribute every day to things moving through.
Hmm. Yeah, no, I like you brought in the service manager conversation because, even though they themselves might not be directly, in a lot of cases, the service managers are tasked with that, right? Because it's internal and maybe they don't want to pay an advisor for internals because usually there's sometimes a labor break or, you're not selling anything. You're just doing what the used car department needs you to do. But, and, they their internal number at the end of a month is a big number. There's not a bigger customer in a dealership than the used car department, right? So even though there might be some discounting and stuff going on, it's still a huge number with the internal cars going through the shop. So the service managers have a big stake in the recon process. Then you got the used car department. The used car manager has a big stake in the process, right? Because they're investing in what they are looking forward to making profit on and putting those cars in the shop. And they have a heavy interest of getting their cars out there as soon as possible so they can sell them quick and turn good profits. And then you plop in the internal writer who's got to marry the two sides, right? Because sometimes that can be of a contentious relationship. And then they're the ones that kind of smooth over or communicate and keep everything going between service department and the used car department. So yeah, that's definitely one, two, and three right there.
Yeah. And let's get into the meat
Let's
and
dive
potatoes
in.
of the used car manager in particular, because I think that is somebody who, we last week we talked about the recon manager. We went into pretty or not last week, but last month,
Mhm.
we went into pretty strong detail about what they do day to day. But what is the used car manager doing, Bobby? And I think this is going to go right hand in hand with what you've been saying for a long time. So that's why I'm offering the question to you first. But yeah, what does the used car manager do every day that helps Recon?
Well, the first and you can really I know we talked about standardizing the process, but you can really tee up, communicate your expectations. I think is the biggest thing they can do. That trade walk, right? The lost art of the trade walk. Bring back the trade walk, communicate a lot up front, and then um, either with the leverage of a tool or have some organized way of communicating that downstream. But they need to tee up their inventory. They're whether they're buying cars at auction, taking cars in on trade, they're doing their damnedest to buy them right. Right. That's a whole art in and of itself. But now what do we do? Do we just unravel when these cars make it to the dealership? Now you got to send them into the black hole of service, hoping they come out the other end, in 5 days or less, right? And a lot of times that doesn't happen. So I guess they can kind of spearhead, and it's kind of the responsibility of both sides, and especially the used car department, to make sure that you have a good relationship. Is that what you're talking about? The relationship between
Well,
sales and service.
I was thinking you were just going to say start on day zero and lightning fast approval. I thought we were going to hear
Oh,
that
got
again.
it. Thank you. And that I would have gotten there, I promise you.
Yeah,
But yeah,
certainly.
tee up the process, but yeah, start on day zero, right? Get your damn car. If the cars are here and ready to go, let's get them into the damn shop. Okay. Don't, monkey. If you have a trade walk, be efficient with it, be consistent with it, do it effectively, put your four squares on the windows, go into rapid recon or recon velocity and tag your cars. Is this a CPO, A car, B car, C car? PDR, wheel repair, dents, scratches, whatever, and then get them into the damn shop, right? And then the second thing you got to do well is, when it finally, comes to you for, hey, here's the estimate for the recon. Approve work fast. Get it done. If you're going to sit on things, I get it. Sometimes, if it's a squeaker, you maybe, you're in the car, you're not sure. You might need to get some other people's opinions whether or not you should keep the car. How much should we put into it? But you got to be fast with the approvals. That's you hit the nail on the head, Josh. And I've said it a million times. Those two things are, supersede the rest. Get
Yeah,
cars in as fast as possible, approve work in a timely fashion, then it's on the service department to do the rest. And you're
and
enabling that by doing those two things well.
100%. And when you dilly daddle on the approval, you're not just losing the time you lost on the approval, you're usually losing a full 24 hours because now the parts department or first of all, the advisor can't add lines to their repair order without your
Mhm,
approval.
mhm,
And then the parts department can't order the parts and get them in on time. So if you wait, through 2 or 3 hours between 10 o'clock and 2 o'clock to do an approval, then we may not be able to meet our parts cutoff time. We may not be able to get those parts in on
And just
time.
add 2 or 3 days to every car
Yeah,
that you're
exactly.
dragging, even if it's, there's really an 8 hour day or 6 hour window for, stock orders. And, and I know used cars, a lot of times we go aftermarket, whether you're relying on O'Reilly's or AutoZone or whatever to deliver the parts. On top of that, Josh, aside from missing parts cutoff times, you've also trained your technicians that they're not going to hear back about that car, right, for half a day. So they're going to park it outside, throw the keys on their bench, and they're on to the next car.
Yep.
And then they're
They'll
on to
take
the
they'll
next
take a
car.
service waiter that might take up their time, later on when
Right.
the parts are finally in.
Or if it's a dedicated guy, they're now 3 cars deep. And lo and behold, you heard about the car, from yesterday morning or 2 days ago. Great. And so now they might have other things going on. Then they'll got to dig their way back to that car that you dragged approval on. So
Yeah.
get your approvals fast. It'd be great if parts are in stock. If the car's in the air and you get the approval, our tools, right? Rapid Recon Pro, for our Velocity customers, or Rapid Recon, that enables, it leverages the technology. Technically, nobody has to leave their spot in the dealership. If you're leveraging the tool, you should have approvals within minutes, right?
Yeah.
So yes, used cars managers, the pay plans that benefit the most from doing this well, approve work in a timely fashion.
Yeah.
You have no business guns ablazing looking for your cars. I said this a billion times. If you are slow at approving work, so approve work in a timely fashion, and then the expectation gets shifted to the service department.
Yeah, and take ownership of your inventory. Understand that, you're the one who's ultimately responsible for selling these cars, getting them on into the customer's hands. So, uh, understanding that that is your primary responsibility to the inventory itself and getting it out, you need to be a part of the process as well. And part of that obviously is just that, what we're describing here really is we're just describing showing up correctly, right?
Love it.
Getting starting on day zero and getting your approvals done. That should just be baseline. Yes, that's what we do. The rest of
Mhm.
it, though, doing a trade walk, getting your intake process correct, standardizing your process, setting an A car, a B car, a C car, that that is uh, that is the next step. That is the next tier up. But
Mhm.
starting on day zero and getting those approvals done is where you just need to start. But the point being that you have an opportunity that no one else that gets service at your dealership does, which is to actually say, "Hey, this is how I want it done." I want to work with this guy who is going to be my internal technician. I want when the car comes in, I want it inspected this way, and I want to focus in on these things which are important to me. Of course, service customers get the standard experience as well, but you as the used car manager, you get a customer experience that's very unique. You have access to that process in a way that other people that are having their car service simply don't. Now, obviously, these aren't your cars, but the idea being that you have an opportunity to say, I want things done in a certain way. And so take that opportunity. And really, what I'm getting at is learn what your people are actually expected to do. I worked with a dealership that was selling cars out of the wazoo during COVID, but they were selling a lot of cars ahead of Recon, and they were stacking up, multiple days on units that were just sitting by in the process while these already sold units were taking up a priority. And we managed to help them work through that issue. But one of the biggest issues they had wasn't stemming from that. It was really stemming from the fact that their one used car tech had to stop what he was doing every time he wanted to move forward in the process. So as soon as he got done inspecting a unit, he'd have to walk over to the parts department. He'd have to wait on average about 30 minutes for a parts associate to get off the phone or stop what they were or finish what they were working with another technician to address his estimate and get that priced out for parts. Then he would have to walk over to an advisor on the service drive. On the service drive, there's
Mm.
there's 5 desks in front of him. 4 of them are empty. I'm walking with him through the process, so I go over with him to the advisors. None of the advisors are there, so he stands there for 15 to 20 minutes until an advisor can address his ticket and price it out and give him the go ahead. And then he walks over to the used car desk, and once again he has to wait. So if that is what is happening at your dealership, please consider that. And honestly, literally, one day go out to the shop and take a car with your used car tech, take it through the whole process and see if there's anywhere where you can eke out a little bit more efficiency, because I guarantee you can, especially if you're not making use of the technologies that are available to you, so that all this walking around and stopping and waiting doesn't have to happen. Because ironically, if that technician could have just sent that away to the parts department and they were able to address it in their own time, that goes a lot quicker than him walking and stopping them. Because what you have to basically, what has to happen if you're doing this process by hand and by foot, is that two people who have two different jobs have to align at the same time. And that's a lot harder to actually achieve than simply this guy says, hey, this is queued up, ready for you. And then when this guy's ready, as soon as he's ready, he comes in and he does that task. If you have tools like us like ours in place at your dealership, then you can measure how long it takes for those things to happen. And so at the end of the week or at the end of the month, you can say to your parts department, hey, we need to be a little bit quicker when these used car estimates come in. We need to get the pricing down faster. Because you actually then have the hard data to back that conversation. You're not just sort of guessing or speaking from a nebulous place of expectation. You've actually seen it happen.
That's a really good point. And, in doing so, in leveraging the tool, you might eliminate all that walking around, right? Not right. And so, look, you want to be the Flintstones or you want to be the Jetsons? It's 2026. We're the freaking Jetsons. Okay. You have tools at your disposal to cut out all that crazy walking around, aligning of two people happen to be in the same place at the same time to get anything done. Right. So here's a platform in which you can communicate damn near instantly and you can react damn near instantly. I know we don't sit around waiting for a rapid recon or a recon velocity notification to stick to us, right? But
Some people
hey,
do.
there it is. There it is. There's a notification bell or there's the ping on my cell phone, right? And the clock's ticking. And you got a good point there too, Josh. We can measure, if you're using the steps in the process, you can measure how long does a parts estimate take. And I was on a phone call with, a couple dealerships recently, and we were I think it was day before yesterday, Josh. It was a high dollar. They sold McLarens, D7s, Lamborghinis. It was a very high end motor car specialty, right? They only have 13 or 15 cars going through, maybe 20 cars a month. Okay, but their recon estimates might be 20, 30 grand depending on what needs to happen to the Lamborghini to get it ready for sale, right? So, but what was going on, Josh? It took them 19 hours on average to approve
Get a
work
part test, or was it approve?
or
Yeah,
prove
approving.
work, or then sometimes parts estimates. Hey guys, you're really fast at approving work, Mr. Manager, but the parts department takes 8 hours on average to put prices on a damn estimate, right? Get the and here we have the technology to do it very fast.
Yeah.
So that's a good point. It's I like to say, recon usually doesn't suck because people suck. Recon sucks, or if it's not going well, it's usually because of all these little communication gaps that in
Yes.
between the steps to the process, right? And if you can get your people to really harness the technology of a tool and have the dedicated people in the process, those are probably the two. That's the one and two number, the pillars of doing recon well, right? Have your dedicated people, right? And if you're a small dealership, at least it's got to be somebody's job to pay attention to it, right?
Yeah.
Second thing, have a tool to measure. Those two things are super, super important today's day and age.
Yeah, and I just think that that story about the technician and literally walking through that process is it's illustrative of what overall leaders can do to help
Hmm.
the organization. Is take that time when you have it to understand someone else's role, especially when it comes to recon, your technicians, your detailers. It's important that you understand how they work so that you can have a good idea of what to expect in terms of their times and in terms of what they're going to be able to achieve when they get new throughput. So, like if you have higher volume, how is your team going to adjust to that? If you don't already know what they're doing, then it's harder for you. And I understand a lot of used car managers, they'll say, well, this is sort of getting out of the bounds of the scope of my role. To a certain extent, that might be an argument. I disagree because it's pertinent to used cars. It's pertinent to the reconditioning process. Obviously, you are the one with the highest priority to get those units to the front line as fast as possible.
Hmm.
So there should really be no excuse. But I think you can reap a lot of benefit from simply understanding what it is that you're asking your team members to do. And so that way you'll know, if there's going to be a big influx of volume from a dealership, maybe you need to be a little bit more, what's the right word? You need to scrutinize the inventory a little bit closer in terms of what do we need to do first? Because this is a car that I can clean up and market pretty quick, but I actually need to diagnose something before I'm confident. So there
Mm,
are those granular decisions that you might make in the workflow, understanding more about your process, understanding more about your people, to be able to leverage that knowledge to get as much time out of the process as possible.
mm. Good point. Good stuff.
I know we have looks like four participants here, and just wanted to remind you guys that at any point in time, if you just want to raise your hand, let us know that you wanted to add something, or if you had a question that we would love to hear from you. This is a participatory experience. But we've talked about the used car manager, Bobby.
Hmm.
We've talked about the recon manager. What other leaders are important? Another one I would always highlight, and this is somebody who only in the last 2.5 years did I really finally kind of key in on how important this person was. But the inventory manager or the lead lot porter, whoever's supposed to be coordinating the movement of cars on the lot, I think they're also an important leader.
Yeah, they're unsung heroes when they're not running the Waffle House for the managers that don't get a lunch break, right? They're but one of the most abused, the lot. But you occasionally, I think what you're referring to, Josh, we run into those lot porters on steroids. They got an expanded role in the dealership. They do a lot. They really do. And when it comes to staging the cars or making sure cars are teed up where they're at in the process, they may be responsible, especially for these dealerships that have offsite, recon centers or detail departments and things like that. They're like the second set of eyes, and if you're really going to build a culture in your dealership around doing recon well, the goal is obviously to get as many sets of eyes on it as possible, and then empower your people to raise the red flag as to when things aren't quite right. As if a car turning yellow and red in rapid recon or recon velocity wasn't enough. Let's at least somebody have the wherewithal to have a conversation as to, hey, what is going on. Get with the used car manager, get with whoever, saying, hey, I see four stalled units in this step here. What's going on. And then maybe tie some pay plan perks to it, right. If we do recon well, and there's certain parts of the workflow that you're responsible for, if you can keep that under a certain time frame, we'll throw you an extra, couple $100 a month or whatever your perk is. But you got to build the culture around it, and looping in those lot porters. They're the ones that you're putting your reputation out there. They're the ones that are, I know some dealerships have that manager QC step where the managers will look over to the car, but the lot porters have a lot to do with that, facilitating that, and then being the final say before these cars make it frontline ready.
Yeah, and there's so many good things that the proper I would my vision of this role is called the inventory manager,
Mhm.
and their basic job description is they're in charge of knowing where every single unit is at, what needs to be done with each unit, if it's a new car, if it needs a PDI, if it needs a delivery, if it's a service waiter and it's waiting on service, if it's a used car, it needs to go through the process, what part of the process is it in.
Mhm.
um, and they're the person that when the car is parked on the lot, it's still their responsibility. Think about your dealership. How many people can say that? That if the car is simply just out there, it's not in their bay, it's not in front of them, it's not a service waiter, that it's still their responsibility. It's few and far between. Usually, and we were talking about this earlier with gaps, right? There are gaps when it comes to coverage and knowledge of any given unit on your lot. And usually your technician knows about the car for as long as it's up on their lift, and in their
Mhm.
bay. The used car manager knows about the car for the length of time that it's going to be on the inventory. Obviously, they're more interested in getting rid of it. But the lot porter is always responsible for the units, and that is the kind of or the I should say the inventory manager, in my view, is always
Yep.
responsible for the units, and that's why they're such a great boon to overall recon processing, because they're the person that sees a car in detail and they say, "Oh, this is a unit that actually it's already been finished," or they see a car out on the lot that's worth a vendor, and or better yet, they're dropping a car off at a vendor. They see a car that's already there, and they notice, oh, hey, that hasn't been updated in Rapid Recon or
Yeah.
Velocity, and they make that update. And usually, they're also the person who, so long as they understand the tool, are the most excited to have it, because so far they've been keeping all this information in their head or on a,
Exactly.
a clunky spreadsheet, and now they have this slick tool to keep track of everything.
Yeah, they're the ones always getting blasted when it comes to finding where cars are at,
Yeah.
And then before the salesman gets on and chases unicorns and rainbows on a golf cart, they're going to track down that lot porter, or even GMs and upper management need to know where cars are at, and they're probably the ones that have the most top of the head awareness as to where these vehicles are, and then making sure it syncs up and is consistent with what the tool reflects, which then should communicate on their behalf. So yeah, I would be excited being that lot porter if there was a tool that gave transparency to the entire dealership about where all these cars are, because they do a damn good job of getting them online for sale, and so they immediately start getting leads on these cars, right? So um, you know that undersung hero of a lot porter is or inventory manager. Yeah, let's call them inventory managers. I'll promote every lot porter in the nation to inventory manager, because that's what they really are. So
Well, I to I've just seen so many different configurations at this point that I don't even know what's standard anymore. So
mhm.
I've seen the role of inventory manager. It's not so novel, but the I've also heard, I've gone to another dealership across the street, and the same guy doing the same job, actually with more experience, is called the lead lot porter. You know what I mean? So
Right.
w- d- to whatever degree that manager title matters, but the point being, if you have somebody who can reliably tell you where most of the units are at on your lot, and that's their job to know, then please put them on Rapid Recon or Velocity and make their
Mhm.
life easier and make them happy. Because they make you happy when they can track down cars that you're desperate to sell and are maybe on that 28-day mark, or about to go over there. What
Yeah. Yeah.
whatever's going to finally put the nail in the coffin for the profit on that vehicle.
Yeah, and so if we I know we got a couple minutes left here. So, if we kind of backtrack a little bit, what can leaders do, or what is, the process based? There's three things, like, we've hit the three pillars quite a bit, Josh, the three golden rules, right? We would love every dealership to have a dedicated team. And then what that means is you got the dedicated writer. Sometimes we talk to dealerships, oh yeah, you got three writers on a drive. We rotate used cars. Okay. Or, do you have dedicated technicians in the shop? And most moderately busy dealerships will already have this in place. So having a dedicated team, or at least somebody, if you're a small volume dealership, right? You do, 30 to 50 cars a month. Guess what? You're going to be better at losing cars when you're low volume, because you don't have as many eyes on it, right? We didn't form a little army to handle recon, but it's got to be somebody's full-time job to keep eyes at least on the recon process. If you don't have an army of people dedicated to it, at least make it somebody's job, or a good chunk of their job responsibility, to pay attention, right? So dedicate people to your process, have a tool to measure. And this is not a sales pitch, right? But they always tell you, if you can't measure it, you can't grow it. So have a tool to measure your recon process. You don't want, it's very costly for, how's recon going? Well, if it's a guess and you have the guess, and you got to collect information from 5 or 6 different sources to see and to guess how you're really doing with recon, that's more expensive than any recon tool, right? I promise you. Not knowing is a very costly thing. So
And the finger
second,
pointing. Yeah. Sorry.
yeah, no, it eliminates the finger pointing. Thank you. It's not just a cost thing, guy. It's a life easier thing. It makes your life easier to manage recon. So have a dedicated team, or dedicate people to the process. Have a tool to measure it, which is number two. And what's the third thing, Josh? I probably said it a million times.
Lightning fast approvals. Start
Build,
on day
well,
one.
yes, we know that, but build a culture
Build a
around it.
culture around it. There you
Build
go.
a culture around it, and you can't build a culture around it if you don't have number one and number two.
Yeah.
Right. So with those things in place, and you talk to any store where the general population of technicians, or if in the event I have to send a used car to the general shop, who aren't on the same page as the mentality of the used car department, it's like herding cats, right? And so that's another reason to keep, dedicated people in the process. It's easier to get everybody's mentality about what the goal of used cars is, reconditioning, on the same page.
Yeah,
right?
and you
So
can work
you're
through that process together. Uh, some of the best organizations that I've seen doing recon have that great relationship between the used car manager and the
Mhm,
technicians. And the thing that we were supposed to do, or the thing that we did, was enable those two to collaborate even better and more
mhm.
effectively, and leveraging technology to be able to do that.
Yep.
Um,
And
and,
I'm always open. Hey, go out and like I always say, go out and have beers. You got to build that relationship. Whatever you got to do in that dealership to build a good relationship between the people that actually make recon happen and the people that want recon to happen. Right? That needs
yeah,
to be a good relationship.
yep, 100%. Well, I think that's
All right,
pretty much
guys.
all we had for
We
today.
are at time. That went quick. I don't know if it's we get all fired up talking so much, but that was a good little session there.
Yeah, and that's a topic I think we can return to time and time again. I think
Mhm,
leadership is super important. We've been over this before, Bobby, but when it comes to, and I didn't even get to mention all this stuff, like star players is another important aspect, is identifying which members of your team are the best at, adapting to new pressures, or that they meet the standard that you're looking for, and making sure you recognize that person and find a way to make that goodness proliferate outwards to others.
mhm.
That's something we might cover in uh, our next webinar. For
Okay.
our one remaining participant, if you'd like to vote, you might be the deciding vote, or you definitely will be the deciding vote if you click on the poll right now. But we have some options in front of us, and we'll be back again the third Thursday of every month, y'all, to talk about recon, all things recon.
Awesome. Appreciate it, everybody. Have a great rest of the month.
Bye bye, everybody. Thank you.